G'day guys and welcome back to our Kart Class Podcast. Today we're going to be discussing why does my kid not get it? I think it's a parent's biggest frustration. You can explain the same things 10 times and your son or daughter just doesn't comprehend what you're saying. So they keep making the same mistake over and over, or whatever they're doing that you're not happy with, they just can't quite fix it. And now so we're seeing other kids that you may have been beating or been faster than only a few weeks ago. Now all of a sudden they've taken off. They're 1 second up the road, or they're at the front of the field and we're still lingering in the middle of the pack. And I just want to sort of point out a couple of things that could potentially help yourself or your son or daughter try and understand things a little bit easier. Now, as a parent, we're expecting a lot on these kids. So some are aged at 6 or 7 and they're driving quite fast. And now we're expecting them to start the corner on the outside of the track. We're expecting them to turn at the right point, clip the apex at the right spot, accelerate, in the right position as well, flow the kart out. We're driving at speeds of 95 kilometers an hour. Got to hit the brakes effectively, but not too hard, but not too soft. We've got to be smooth in our steering wheel. Not too aggressive on the throttle because that could make the rear of the kart slide. You can already see how confusing this can get for a young kid. Now, when we're at school, I imagine that teachers, they're teaching kids education because that's what they're experienced at. Now, as a parent, you're teaching off of a lot of emotion and passion. So you may not have driven before, and now all of a sudden you're trying to be your coach to your son or daughter. And again, expectations are higher because there's a care factor. You want the best for your kids. And I've coached kids that from day one are exceptional and they just understand it. And then on the flip side, I've coached kids that it takes 6 months to become good. And even the ones that take 6 months, it doesn't necessarily matter because it takes them a little bit longer to get to the top or to the best of their ability. But once they have a good understanding on what we're trying to coach and the technique and the setup and how to drive certain tracks, then once they have that intel and they can actually sort of cement it so it's not sort of being forgotten from time to time, then they're as quick as anyone. So yeah, kids learn at different times, and having coached, I'd hate to think how many kids I've coached over the last 15 years, probably coach 100 kids a year, maybe even more. You see kids learning at different times. Now, as an example of when I started, and even my cousin James, really bad. Like it didn't come natural to either of us. It was a lot of frustration from my dad, who coached us both. So people think, how have you won so many titles over the course of your karting career? And they find it hard to grasp that it didn't come natural and that I wasn't exceptional from day one. And now there's so many drivers that were beating me as a cadet. And then once I sort of had a full grasp on what my dad was trying to coach me and what other people were trying to help out with, once I sort of put that all together, I was like a different beast. And then obviously the confidence grows, and once you start winning, you're believing in yourself, and all of a sudden then the kids who were beating me at a younger age bracket, I was able to consistently beat them in the junior and senior ranks. So as I said, it didn't come natural to me. Things that were being explained, it took me a little bit longer to actually fully digest and put onto the track. My cousin James took me maybe 3 years. So I started when I was around 6, and then, just plodded around, did a lot of laps, 7, 8, when I was getting towards 9, that's when I started to piece it all together. I could drive a relatively fast lap, but then I couldn't, get a race start, or I couldn't overtake. And then, you'd get that right, and then all of a sudden you couldn't defend, so you let that person back pass. So you couldn't sort of string it all together. And my cousin James, he's quite a few years older than me, but my dad sort of reminds me that he took him about even up to 4 years to become quite good and decent. So even if I see a kid that's exceptional on day one, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be a future champion. It's just that they understand things a little bit quicker than the next kid that I coach, and half their luck, they're going to get some quick rewards because at the time they're just a little bit better than the other kids around them. And then once other kids understand it, then they're going to catch up, or at least, be able to compete with those other kids. So don't always put too much stress on the situation on your kids. Like, again, my dad, one of the best for me, he would be quite hard with me. Like, we're wasting our time. We're going to sell our stuff. What are you actually doing out there? Are you even trying? These are probably terms that you've heard, or, you've heard someone else, or you might even be saying to your son or daughter about, their on-track sessions, getting quite feisty because, again, you're passionate. You want the best for your kids. You can see that they can do better, but they're just not quite doing it all. So all I'm trying to say is that some of the reason why your kids, in brackets, not getting it is that it's quite potentially just the language that you're using to explain things. Now, if you're saying to your son or daughter, you're driving like shit, well, then what are they going to think? They're driving like shit. Like, it doesn't actually help them. So if you say, hey, Joe, you're missing the apex by a kart length, maybe just brake a little bit earlier to hit the apex. At least you're giving your kid some sort of idea on what to do. Saying you're driving like shit, which is, sometimes it worked for me when I was receiving that sort of coaching and information. It was like, okay, so shit's obviously no good, but what am I actually doing? Like, why am I driving like shit? I don't know. You're not telling me. So have a think about the language that you're using. Are you actually explaining things to them, or are you just using frustration to get it out, and that your son or daughter's got no idea still what to do? So then what happens next session? They're going to drive like crap again because they haven't actually been told what their mistakes are, why they're making these mistakes, where the improvement's going to be found. Explain to them, use the language, break it down, very small, brake earlier, turn in earlier, turn in later, accelerate slowly so they don't spin out or slide out, a wider line. Really keep it basic, but actually explain to them what they're doing right or wrong. That could be some of the reason why it took me 3 years to become half good, because Dad would be like, just brake here, just do this, just do that. But I couldn't do A, B, and C straight away as soon as he told me. It just didn't come natural. It wasn't something that, like I said, I picked up on very quickly. Now, these days, a lot of the young kids are fortunate to have simulators, to have access to a lot more video, to YouTube videos of watching other people driving on the same track. They've got a lot more resources. So we do see that kids pick up things a lot faster, because they just have more technology to be able to process information on. But again, it still comes down to, if you're not explaining it properly, then your son or daughter is going to have very limited chance of actually trying to improve at the rate that you're expecting them to. So yeah, just try not to, where you can, put too much pressure on. And now other kids, like I said, they learn differently. Having coached so many different drivers of different skill level, different backgrounds of, some have, their parents have raced motor racing before, motor racing cars. Some have got no idea. They've literally never seen anything with motors on it before. They want to get into the sport. So having coached a lot of different kids and backgrounds and parents and things like that, that's why some kids are going to peak a lot quicker, because they are fully invested into motor racing. So that's all they live and breathe. They watch it. They play the simulators. They can watch on social media. Like that's their life. That wasn't me. I love driving go-karts, but I didn't necessarily watch every single session on track like for other classes or for motor racing on TV. It didn't have the same excitement. So again, it took me a little bit longer to get those fundamentals in place because I didn't live and breathe it. But like I said, it took me a little bit longer. Once I had it all, the info that I needed, bang, I was away like everyone else. So that's half the battle why your kid might not get it, is because they don't live and breathe it just yet. And for some, it's like the first 2 months they get it, and some it's like it's a year down the track. But all I'm trying to say is just try and stick with it. Use the right language. That's probably the biggest thing I can get out of this episode, is that how are you communicating things with your kids, or with the kids that you're actually trying to coach? Because that's going to be detrimental to whether they can actually understand something or they just got no idea. Hopefully, this episode has given you a couple of little resources in regards to why your kid might not fully grasp yet what to do on the track, tell them things like they're shit or, I'm just sick of what you're doing out there. Like, explain what they're actually doing, what you're hoping that they're going to try and improve on the following sessions, and really break down the words into very simple terminology. That's how your kids can understand. And don't stress too much yet if the kid around you has all of a sudden progressed pretty quickly, because kids do learn at different rates. We don't know what they're doing outside of kart racing, whether it's simulator stuff, whether it's watching videos. Some kids are putting in more effort, so they're getting a quick reward, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't catch them or you can't get back to their level or surpass them as well. So I hope this is actually impactful for a few of you out there. Hope it can help. Like I said, if this podcast is resonating to you and you think that other people can maybe benefit from it, then please feel free to share it around and to give it a review where possible as well, so we can reach more in the karting community. Until next time, guys, I appreciate you listening in, and cheers.